Welcome to Older Militarist Radio TV, Lifelong Catholics, and what do us all for free, and for the love of Jesus Christ, and for Holy Mother, the Church, or defend our Holy Mother, the Church. This one might be one of the longest ones on the foundation of the Church history programs. We're going to go into the Ottonian Empire, to the founding of the College of Cardinals, and then to the Benedict Arnold of the Catholic Church, Martin Luther. And we welcome Brother Alexis to the program.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Militarist Radio TV for this very quick tour of the history of the church, just to get Catholics oriented if they don't know anything about. So we're going to start at one of the glorious peaks of church history, which is the foundation of the Ottonian Dynasty, which comes immediately after Charlemagne. I'm going to go down to one of the saddest moments in Western Christianity, Martin Luther, in the beginning of the so-called Protestant, Catholics call it the Protestant Revolt, not the Reformation.
So the Ottonian dynasty was created in the 9th century, and the founding member was Henry the Fowler, Duke of Saxony, and he was the father of Otto the Great.
Now, Germany at this time is a kingdom that has separated from the kingdom of the Franks and the kingdom of Lotharingia, because Charlemagne's three sons divided the kingdom. And the Charlemagne's family dies out in each of the three kingdoms. But they were elective kingdoms, so because they follow the Germanic custom of electing their king. So this is how Henry the Fowler's son becomes emperor. I think Henry the Fowler was married to like a niece or granddaughter of Charlemagne. I think that was how they got contacted.
Yeah.
And this begins what's called the Ottonian Empire or the Ottonian Dynasty. And as a little side note, if you want your kids to learn this, there's a wonderful game all about this period of history. But this was the great period of German Catholic history.
Mm-hmm.
In modern times, we think of Germany as Nazis, Protestant Prussians, Freemasons, all kinds of evils come out of Germany in modern day. But in the Middle Ages, Germany was Catholic, and it would produce saints and built monasteries and huge cathedrals and wonderful libraries of books and colleges and universities. It was totally different Germany. Difference between a soul with faith and a soul that's possessed by the devil.
Yeah.
Germany's history is sad because it begins glorious and ends very badly.
Yeah. So
tell us something about Otto, his dynasty, and his family, AJ.
Yeah. So to have the man be called great, you need a great woman to be married to him. And that is so very true. Let's get my blog up here working here. Saint Adelaide of Italy was the wife of Otto the Great.
Okay, so he married a saint. And can you tell us something about her?
He was born in the Orb Castle in the Orb Kingdom of Upper Burgundy, now modern day Switzerland. Her father was Rudolph II of Burgundy, a member of the Elder House of the Welf, and Bertha of Swabia. She was involved with her parents in the fight to control not only Burgundy but also Lombardy, and so She was then she was married twice. Once to decided to marry the son of Lothar the second, nominal king of Italy, and she was only 15 years old. It produced a daughter, Emma of Italy, and I do believe,
Yeah, her husband died. In the Middle
yeah,
Ages, when you hear that women or kings married once or twice, it wasn't because of divorce like in modern times. So he
yeah,
dies, and I guess that means she now gets the crown of Italy.
yeah. And then she then let's see here. She sent an emissary to Otto the First, asking for his protection. Then she met him at the old Lombard capital of Pavia, and there they met, then got engaged, and then finally married on September 23rd, 1951.
951.
Yeah, and early, just right after they got married, she had two children with him, Henry and Bruno, but both of them died before reaching adulthood. And then the stepson, Ludolf, Duke of Swabia, tried to cause a big revolt, but it was squashed by Otto. And then, so by what he did, Otto decided to remove his son's titles and gave Adelaide the favored position and her descendants at the court.
Oh, so he had been married before too, and his wife died. She had
Hmm.
children by a first wife.
So then there, and then with that, he submitted the Holy Roman Empire by defeating the Hungarians invading at the Battle of Lichfield on August 10th, 955. Then he extends the boundaries of East Francia beyond the Elbe River, defeating the Obotrites and other Slavs of the Elbe at the Battle of Lignitz. That same
Mhm.
year,
Now,
yeah.
for those who don't know, the Elbe River is the big river that flows down from Prague to Hamburg.
And then that same year, Adelaide gave birth to Otto the Second. Then she gave birth to a daughter who became Matilda, Abbess of Quedlinburg. And I believe she is another saint. Yeah.
The battle with, you mentioned that he defeated the Hungarians. The Magyar peoples, which we call in the West Hungarians, they call themselves Magyar. They were tribes from northern Russia, and they invaded Europe in the end of the ninth century and would go all around Europe, sacking cities and pillaging things. They started on a bad foot, but they weren't Christians; they were pagans, and it was Otto who defeated them in battle. And it will be Saint Stephen who converts to the Catholic faith and brings his people into the church. But that was a very important battle because no one was defending Europe. It was only Otto who stood between them, and the Magyars had wandered a couple times around the Alps, sacking cities.
Yeah, then she accompanied her husband on a second expedition to Italy to subdue the revolt of Berengar II and to protect Pope John the 20, Pope John the 12th. In Rome, Otto the Great was crowned Holy Roman Emperor on February 2nd, 962 by Pope John the 12th. Breaking new
Okay.
ground, the
I was
Holy
going to
Father also crowned
say,
Adelaide as Holy Roman Empress.
okay. So you notice the date. They chose the feast of the presentation of the child Jesus in the temple, where Charlemagne was crowned on Christmas Day.
Hmm.
And is John the 12th going to put the Apostolic See in some kind of special relationship with the Empire, the Holy Roman Empire of Otto?
Yeah, let me get to that document. Maybe.
This is something we have a hard time understanding today in the modern times, because since the French Revolution, civil governments around the world have become anti-clerical and anti-Christic. They're hostile to the Catholic Church. They've killed they've imprisoned popes.
Mhm.
They've stolen church lands wholesale. They stole trillions and trillions of dollars worth of real estate from the Catholic Church, lands that the church had because people donated it to them over the centuries to take care of the poor, run hospitals, schools, and stuff. They're constantly hostile, publishing godless laws. So when we think of the state in modern times, we think of it as an evil institution, morally speaking, with totally corrupt people running it. But in the Middle Ages, it was the exact opposite. You had saints running empires, and they were very friendly with the church. So
Yeah, so you want to talk about a Pope who was young. He was just 25 years old.
it was John the 12th.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at this time in Italy, there was not yet a College of Cardinals. The election of the Roman pontiff took place when all the clergy and people came together a few days after the death of the previous pope, and they voted. And the powerful Roman families would want one of their sons to become pope because that would give them a lot of influence in central Italy. Well, usually their sons all got married. So they'd find the youngest boy in that family and who had some education and said, we're going to make you pope, whether you wanted to be pope or not. It didn't work out so well because, most young men are thinking of marriage at age 25. And if you force them to become pope, then they can't marry. And some of them were good men and gave up that, sacrificed that. And some were not good men and kept some women on the side.
Yeah, so even though this document, they agree that Otto will be the protector of Italy and the papal and the Pope. It was right after this when Otto and his family and his armies left, where Otto can say yay or nay to the election of the Pope because he wanted a worthy man to become the Holy Father. And right after this,
Does
uh,
this document have a name?
yeah, the Diploma Ottonianum,
Okay, the Ottonian diploma. And
and
I'll
on
just wait. I want to comment one moment. So in modern times, we think the Pope can only be elected by cardinals, or the Pope can only be elected by members of the clergy. But this is an error. It's not historically founded at all. It's a clerical error. And it's usually pushed by people who call themselves traditionalists who don't know anything about tradition at all. So the emperor, even before Otto, even the Greek emperors and the Catholic emperors of Rome before Rome fell, they all had a say in the election of the Pope. Um, Even if they weren't a resident of the Diocese of Rome, and that is because the emperor, as a person, as a legal person, is present in every region of his empire. He is a citizen of every land and every town by his imperial authority. And so, what John the 12th was doing was not an innovation. He had just crowned Otto and his wife, emperor and empress. Therefore, they would have some say in the election of the Pope, but Otto had him put it in writing. And this is this document will influence the relationship between the German Empire, Holy Roman Empire, and the Apostolic See, all the way down to the reign of Pius X, Saint Pius X.
yeah, and it was on Saint the martyr feast of Saint Valentine, February 14th. The emperor, the empress, the and everybody else, his army, left Rome to continue to defeat Berengar and Adalbert. And right when they left the city gates of Rome, the Pope quickly changed his mind and went in to talk to the Magyars and the Byzantine Empire to form a league against Otto, who returned of that year in November and convened a synod of bishops that deposed John and crowned Pope Leo the Eighth, a layman, as Pope.
And they deposed John the 12th for immorality.
Hmm.
Yeah, because he was 25, he probably had a woman on his side and he wasn't keeping his things.
So, yeah.
Otto didn't suffer treachery.
Mm-mm. So, yeah. And it was in the Ottonian reform of the church went down through the to the great Pope Gregory the Eighth or Seventh, who did the his great reforms on the liturgy.
Mm.
It was one of the Ottonian reforms to keep it keep the church just producing saints like it was.
Mm-hmm. You want to talk about Otto the third or
Yeah, okay. Let's see. There we go.
Otto the second, Otto the third? And so I think
Yeah.
there's three of them.
So he was co-ruler with his father Otto the Great. Then he was crowned Emperor in Otto in 967. He ascended the throne at the age of 18 by excluding the Bavarian line of Ottonians from the line of succession. He strengthened imperial authority and secured his own son's succession to the imperial throne. During his reign, Otto II attempted to annex the whole of Italy from the empire, bringing him into conflict with the Byzantine Empire and with the Saracens of the Fatimid Caliphate. His campaign against the Saracens ended in 982 with a disastrous defeat at the Battle of Stilo. Moreover, in 983, Otto experienced a great Slav rising against his rule. He died in 983 at the age of 28 after a
Oh.
10-year reign, and then succeeded by his 3-year-old son, Otto III. And it was here that Empress that his wife, Empress Theophano, um, and she didn't want to follow her um, late husband's imperialistic ideas, devoted herself to furthering her own agenda in Italy. So, yeah, that was Otto the second.
Otto the second.
Then when Otto the third became 18 years old, he reclaimed the throne from his mother, and there he gave the church two popes, one after the other.
You want to name them, the popes?
Pope Gregory the Fifth, or Bruno of Carthena, and Gerbert of Urliac, or Pope Sylvester the Second.
Mm-hmm.
And in the in the year 1000, he made a pilgrimage to the Congress of Gniezno in Poland, establishing the Archdiocese of Gniezno and confirming the royal status of the PS ruler Boleslav I the Brave, expelled from Rome in 1001. And Otto III died at age 21 the next year without an opportunity to reconquer the city. But he was buried in the Vatican.
Okay. So Nice, so for I don't know that's how you pronounce the city for those who don't know, is the oldest bishopric in Poland. The whole Catholic faith of the Polish people comes from this foundation of Otto III at Nyso and the PS dynasty, because the Poles converted late to Christianity. And so very, very influential, even though they had short lives. But Otto III was a great statesman. And I know you always want to talk about his tomb in the Vatican. Whatever became of it? Oh, first, what was it made of and what became of it? And where can you see it today?
Yeah, so yeah, let's do that.
So, as you know, St. Peter's Basilica won't come into being until the 16th century when the popes asked Michelangelo to design it and build it. So, we're talking about St. Peter's, the old basilica, the one that I think came into being in the sixth century, right at the end of the Roman Empire. And this was also before the French Revolution, when we Catholics still had the tradition of burying noblemen in churches. And that persisted all the way until the fall of the Papal States. In modern canon law, no one can be buried in a church, which is actually a Masonic concept, because before Napoleon, all Catholics were buried in church. You weren't buried in a cemetery. You were buried under the church. The basement of every parish church was our
Yeah.
charnel house, and that's where the bodies were prepared for burial. And this was to protect the bodies from being desecrated, because since you are a baptized Christian, your body's sacred. You would be buried for a time in a charnel box, and then they would put your bones in a thing. But if you were very wealthy, you had a slab of marble put on the floor or wall inside the church saying, here lies so and so. If you visit any church in Europe, Catholic Church, you will see these monuments.
So, it wasn't Otto III who's buried in the Vatican, but it was his father, Otto II. And yeah, let's give you the place where he's buried. At the back of the south side aisle in the sarcophagus with the remains of Emperor Otto II and the palace of the vicinity of St. Peter's so he was buried there. And it's in the Vatican grottos. And for a few decades, the porphyry that remained in the grotto, it was still on the tomb. The lid of the coffin was still as it should be. Until the artist Carlo Fontana stole the lid. And whoever gets baptized at the baptismal font in St. Peter's, you're being baptized in the lid of Otto II's grave.
Which is a beautiful red marble. So Fontana eyeing that piece of stone and probably cheating on a papal contract, saying, I'll get a good piece of red marble. He stole one. And that's just totally bizarre. And I think he did that for a Spanish pope.
Mhm.
And since the Spanish wanted to erase all memory that the German emperors once had a lot influence over Italy, they
Yeah.
did that purposely to disrespect him. One of the
That would have
injustices.
been Otto II, would have been my 49th great uncle.
So,
Mhm.
one interesting fact. So, in the Vatican, you can see two really important places: the spot where Charlemagne's crowned emperor in 800
Yeah.
AD, and the baptistry, which is the lid of the Emperor Otto III. There's a lot more famous nobility buried in the basilicas of Rome, but
Mhm.
the Ottonians are who succeeds them now. Was
Yeah,
it Henry the First?
yeah, let's see. Yeah. Oh, Henry II, succeeded by Henry II, a son of Duke of Henry II of Bavaria, and thereby the member of the Bavarian line of the Ottonians take
Mhm.
over. He was crowned king on June 7th, 1002. He spent his first years consolidating his political power on the borders of the German kingdom, waged several campaigns against Boleslaw I, then moved successfully to Italy, where he was crowned emperor by Pope Benedict the VIII on February 14th, 1014. He reinforced his rule by endowing and founding numerous dioceses, such as the bishopric of Bamberg in 1007, intertwining the secular and ecclesiastical authority over the empire. Henry II was canonized by Pope Eugene III in 1146.
So Saint Henry II. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
he did a lot for building churches and endowing things, and he wouldn't suffer the crime of simony, which was very common in the Middle Ages, where you would pay someone a lot of money and he would help you become bishop or pope even. And he taught his son Henry III well, because Henry III is going to also want to be crowned emperor.
Mm-hmm.
By the time he comes of age, there's a problem because at Rome there's three popes,
Mm-hmm.
not one, there's three. And Benedict the Ninth, who was like 16, 14 years old when he was made pope by his family, because it was an Italian family from Tusculum. And well, Benedict didn't want to be a priest. He wanted to marry. And since he was pope, he could do anything he wanted. So historians of some 40, 60 years after his death said he basically organized orgies in the papal palace with men and women. He was just totally depraved. And after about 12 years of that, the Catholics of Italy couldn't take it any long, and they rose up and drove him out. And they put in the Bishop of Tusculum, who takes the name Sylvester III, to kind of put him in line with the popes. Now, Benedict the Ninth had gotten the approval of the German emperor, and I think it was Henry III at the time. Maybe it was Father Henry II. Sylvester II didn't get approval. Sylvester III didn't get approval of the emperor. He's considered an anti-pope even to this day. But Benedict the Ninth's family, who was the most powerful nobility of the central Italy, they raised an army and drove Sylvester III out of Rome, and he took power again. So eventually his godfather, John Gratian, said, why don't you get married? You're a young man. It's obviously you want to marry. And you can get married if you leave the clerical state, resign from being pope. Okay? And he said, well, I don't have money to do that. And John Gratian was very wealthy because John Gratian was the treasurer of the Apostolic See, and he was in charge of all the church contracts. And somehow he got wealthy on that. The writers will say he was a good man, but somehow he got wealthy being in charge of all government contracts. I think we'd call that graft today. So he gave him a lump sum of money and bought the papacy from Benedict the Ninth. And Benedict the Ninth went off and married the girl of his heart's desires. He left the priesthood. And so Henry III wants to become emperor, which means he has to be crowned by the true pope at Rome. And one of these three men would have to crown him. He'd have like a stain on his reputation. So he wrote Gregory V, which is Gregory VI, which is John Gratian. Once he becomes pope, he takes the name Gregory VI. He says, why don't you call a provincial council at Sutri? The year is 1046. And the date the council opened was December 21st. And all the bishops of central Italy and all the clergy of Rome came, and Henry III only brought like 1,500 men. And Sutri is a pretty small town, so basically the whole town is military occupied. And they went into this little church there, which was like one of the only churches standing because the cathedral was still under construction. So they could meet in the crypt, but there was no walls or roof yet to the cathedral. So they met in a small church. Not much bigger than a parish church anywhere today. Not much bigger than the parish church in your town, AJ. I've been and I've seen it. And he said, I want to hear, how is it Each of you claim to be Pope. So he said, tell me the story of Sylvester the Third. How did he become Pope? So everyone told him the story how he basically came to Rome with an army and kicked out the Pope. And the clergy all said, yeah, you'll be our Pope, even though Benedict the Ninth was still alive. And he goes, well, you're an anti-Pope. You usurped. So he had Sylvester the Third put in chains and dragged off to a monastery for the rest of his life. If he would leave the monastery, he would be, and that was Sylvester the Third, anti-Pope. Then he said to Gregory the Sixth, and how did you become Pope? And Gregory the Sixth was honest enough to say exactly the truth. He wasn't a fool. He knew that in the presence of Henry the Third, you better tell the truth. Okay. And he said, well, Benedict the Ninth didn't want to be Pope. He was having orgies and things like that. And I suggested he give him some money for his marriage. And so he sold me the papacy. And the emperor was like, you bought the papacy? Don't you know that's the crime of simony? That was like the worst crime you could commit in the church in the Ottonian Empire, was buying an ecclesiastic office. It is today too, but actually it's become an industry at Rome. That's why Paul VI forces all bishops to retire at 75, because they want to sell that office to someone else. It's actually corruption. It's not a reform, because bishops are supposed to serve until they die, not retire at 75. So Henry III was like, what do you think you should do about that? And Gregory VI says, I'm going to renounce the papacy and admit I did wrong. And Henry III said, that's a good decision. And the chronicles record that Henry III deposed him. The imperial register says that. And the Vatican, the ecclesiastic chronicle says Gregory VI willingly resigned. Now, at the side of Gregory VI is his acolyte, Saint Hildebrand, who's going to go on to become Gregory VII and begin the Gregorian reform. But at this point, he had been following around a man who was actually an anti-pope. So then Benedict the Ninth was summoned to the council, and he wouldn't come. So the council declared him contumacious and deposed him. Since he had already sold the papacy, he was already willing not to be Pope. And then the clergy of Rome said, well, who are we going to have as Pope? Henry, since you've come to Rome, maybe you can suggest one. And he suggested Clement II, who was his chaplain from Germany. And that decision was made in the crypt of the Cathedral Sutri. If you go down at the crypt of the Cathedral Sutri, which is under the high altar today, you'll see a bas-relief of Clement II saying, here in 1046, on December 22nd, Clement II was elected Roman pontiff in the presence of Emperor Henry III and the clergy of Rome. Really historic moment. Most people don't know this little fact. So there was a council that deposed 3 popes, and it would never happen if it wasn't for Henry III. And though Henry III, I don't think is a saint, he went on. He then had the council transferred, so its 3rd day was held at the Vatican on the 24th, and Clement II was crowned Pope, and on December 25th, he's crowned Emperor in the presence of Saint Peter Damian and Saint Hildebrand, and the future, I think also the future blessed Virgilius III, who's Pope like 40 years later. And he cleaned up the papacy single-handedly. Not like in modern times when there's controversies on who's the real Pope. People go around like this and they complain on blogs for 12 years, but they don't do squat. The Duke of Liechtenstein doesn't do squat. The Duke of Luxembourg doesn't do squat. They're Catholics. The Bourbons of Naples, they don't do squat. The Catholic King of Spain doesn't do squat. No one does squat. But Henry III says he cleaned up the whole thing all on his own. And he didn't threaten or kill anyone. He just said, tell me the facts,
Mm-hmm.
And in the face of imperial power, weak men, any man, will have the common sense to tell the truth. And if we only had a Catholic emperor today, we wouldn't have all the corruption in the Vatican we do have. So that is that moment in history which all the clericalists after the Council of Basel in 425 would say, well, council doesn't have authority over the Pope. Well, that council had authority over who is Pope, because it had authority over the man claiming to be Pope, not who actually was the Pope. So you won't find that in most history books, even Catholic ones, because corrupt clergy don't want anyone to know that there's a way to clean up corrupt clergy. They want separation of church and state, which is a Masonic concept. And the corrupt ecclesiastic mafia also want separation of church and state because they don't want anyone looking over their shoulder. So that's the great lesson of the Ottonian dynasty. And they are probably turning over in their graves. What's been going on in the church the last 12 years?
See, my reaction every time we do a show uncovering all this, he's like, yeah, you see, my blood is boiling, like, and I can't do nothing about it because
Yes, the problem in the problem in Germany will start with the Protestant revolt.
Mhm.
But it goes downhill after that because the popes actually got this crazy idea in the head that Catholics should cooperate with Protestants and establish secular governments. So
I think is it before that for some odd reason they decided to create a College of Cardinals.
okay, so yeah, the Council of Sutri is in 1046. So in 1053, I think it is, or 1058, it's about that, Pope Nicholas II will issue the bull in nomine Domini and establish the College of Cardinals. And this was to try to end the infighting of the Italian families on who would be Pope. And he specifically renounced the Ottonian diploma. So from then on, they weren't going to ask the emperor to confirm as valid the election of the Pope. He wrote a law that would say how the Pope would be elected, who the electors would be, how many votes he'd have to win, and how it would know to be valid. And the German emperors tolerate this because at least it's a legal system that no one can doubt who's Pope. It's a lot easier than having to send your army down to Italy every couple of years to make sure that things are going right. Very, very costly. Much better to have a legal thing.
Mm-hmm.
So this it's called the 10th century, from the 920s to the 1050s. It's called the Seculum Obscurum in the history of the papacy because there was so much nepotism and corruption making popes. But with Nicholas II, he starts the College of Cardinals. The College of Cardinals seems to, well, the average person who knows anything about law and government would say, hey, this is a good idea. Let's get a law and organize how it's done. And with the College of Cardinals, the people and the clergy don't have the right to vote anymore. Only the bishops of the Roman province have the right, or the bishops of the papal court, who are now going to be called the key cardinals of the Church of Rome. We use in English the phrase key. In Latin, they use the phrase hinge, like the hinges of the door. Who are the hinges on the door? Because doors in the Middle Ages had lots of hinges on it, not just two like we have today. Metalworking that's so good. So the cardinals get the whole right to vote. And since the College of Cardinals has been founded, I think we've only had 3 or 5 saints in 1,000 years. Whereas in the first 1,000 years, we have, I think it's over 100 saints who were popes. So the clergy and the laity of Rome chose a lot more frequently, chose better men than members of the papal court have. And just look what the disaster we are in now. We're making this video in the week before the conclave of 2025. So in a week we'll know what to say, but we have a law now, and it really doesn't depend on whether men are honest, holy, or even believers. We
Yeah.
don't know if we're going to get a pope who's going to be Catholic or one who's going to persecute the church, unfortunately. But that was Nicholas II. He was trying to put some order into the thing, and he didn't respect the decision of St. Peter, because St. Peter was inspired to leave the election to the people and clergy of Rome. And
Mhm.
that was a decision he made in the Holy Spirit. Because when you don't have a law, then um, no one can fiddle with the election. No one can plan how to take over the church, because you don't know what's going to happen when the faithful and clergy come together 3 days after the funeral of the Pope. How they will feel. You can't buy everyone off. You know, today at Rome, there's probably 1.5 million Catholics. You couldn't buy them off, right? And they always elected, of course, an Italian or a Roman. So they never had foreign influence or control over the papacy. Nicholas II didn't have that kind of foresight to see what would happen. Because what
Yeah.
will happen is he'll start appointing important clergy of the kingdoms of Europe as cardinals in the papal court. And then the papacy becomes a political objective of everyone in Europe to control, when it was
Mhm.
at the beginning only the objective of certain few families in the province of Lazio around Italy. Um,
And now we yeah, now the mafia of the Cardinals is it's almost want to say it's almost more deadly than the typical mafia of Italy.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, it's more protected, has a higher social status. But initially, Nicholas II's bull in Nomine Domini actually really had a good effect, because it led to the election of Saint Hildebrand as Gregory VII, and he begins what's called the Gregorian reform in the church. He will kick out priests who are cohabiting with women, priests who are sodomites. He will depose people who bought bishoprics. He will excommunicate laymen who try to control the nomination of bishops. And for the next 40 years, he and his successors waged battles with monarchs all over Europe. And he excommunicated the German emperor, I think, twice. But he didn't do it because he wanted to drive people out of the church. He did it because he wanted to get them to respect the house of God, so that holy and honest men would be appointed, not friends of some nobleman's court.
Mhm.
And he actually before he died, he said, I lift all my excommunications. He forgave all the noblemen who had rebelled. And he died in exile in the kingdom of Naples. And that's in the 1070s. So in the beginning of in the 1080s, we have a wonderful Frenchman who was one of the cardinals get elected, Ode de Siguer, who was Bishop Ostia and Albano, Cardinal of Ostia and Albano, and he takes the name Urban II, and he's Blessed Urban II. He calls the First Crusade. He was by blood connected with most of the nobility of France. The Germans at this time aren't really interested in any other part but controlling Germany, but the French have nowhere to go, because the Spanish are taking Spain back
Mhm.
and doing quite well. And the Germans are waging war against the pagans of the Baltic and doing quite well. And the French have nowhere to go. So Urban II says, let's liberate the Christians of the Mideast. And that changes world history. So we can't blame Nicholas II for founding the College of Cardinals. He couldn't possibly see 1,000 years into the future. But in the immediate effects of it were really wonderful and really great. And the first, second, so the Crusades have dozens and dozens of canonized and beatified saints that went
Mhm.
on it. No less than Saint Francis, for example, who went as a deacon on the Fifth Crusade, or Saint Louis the Ninth, King of France, probably the holiest king ever in the history of Europe, who actually organized two crusades and died in Tunisia. He organized the Seventh and the Eighth Crusades. And uh, that gets Catholics to start thinking how their faith is supposed to change the world. It's no longer something you do in a chapel on a mountain as a hermit. It's no longer the prerogative of monks in monasteries or nuns in convents. It's
Mhm.
no longer just the kings or queens, occasionally be holy, who are helping Catholics in your own country. It's now looking over the horizon, over the oceans, around the world to bring the faith of Christ to distant lands, or at least defend the faith of Christ from unbelievers. And this is a new era in Christianity, and it begins with Urban II, who was a cardinal.
Mhm. And then how does the college the work of Nicholas II and all the others, how does the College of Cardinals start to take a nosedive?
It starts to take a nosedive with St. Louis IX's son. I think his name was Robert, who was one evil dude. He just went over after his father died, who was such a saint. He just like got he just went to the dark side, and he pressures Boniface VIII uh, because he wants to appoint bishops in France. And Boniface VIII goes, no, no, there's a thing called Gregorian form. You don't appoint bishops in France. I appoint bishops in France. Boniface VIII publishes Unum Sanctum, which says that the Pope is the judge of the secular world. So um, a Pope can depose kings. And the King of France, Robert, said, no, that's not going to. So he sent a messenger down to this Roman family that was allies of him and say, you need to apply some pressure on Boniface VIII. And they went up to the palace at Anagni, and I've been there, which is a rather modest affair, and they beat him up. They broke down the door. They assaulted him physically, and they punched him so viciously that a month later he dies. And that's called the slap of Anagni. It wasn't really a slap. It was a gang. It's like a criminal gang him beat up the Pope. And all Europe was horrified because no Pope had been beaten to death in 1,000 years. From the reign of Constantine to Boniface VIII, the papacy was respected by the Christian kings of Europe. And here we had a Catholic king sending mobsters to beat the Pope up. So after Boniface VIII dies, the cardinals, Italians and non-Italians together, decide we better elect a pro-French because, we don't want to get beaten to death. And the papacy ends up in the hands of the French kings, and that's the downfall of the church. Within 70 years, we have the Great Schism in the West. The papacy is at Avignon. The anti-pope is at Avignon, and the true pope is at Rome. And that goes on for like till 1415. And France had such power that even when the Great Schism ends and all the cardinals decide to vote for the same guy, Martin V, Martin V was a cardinal of one of the anti-popes from on the French side. But the Romans endured it just to put the controversy to an end. And it's not until the Venetians and the Spanish start getting involved in influencing the papacy that the French influence fades out. But we'll have French influence in the nomination of popes for a couple of centuries. And the Templars are suppressed. The King of France gets the Templars suppressed, which was one of the most powerful private military organizations in Europe. They were devout Catholic monks. They were faithful to Christ. They weren't involved in any shenanigans. He had them completely railroaded. His courtiers used all kinds of. It's with this King of France, the son of Louis IX, that all the evil tactics of modern Freemasonry are based: propaganda, lies, false accusations, blackmail, um, 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 physical threats against the clergy. They got Clement V at the Council of Vienne to suppress the Templars. And the King of France took all their property, confiscation of church lands. And I think he's the first monarch to confiscate church lands. And the Masons repeat what he did in the 19th century and destroy the church as an institution in Europe. And the Kingdom of France never really recovers. There's going to be Catholic kings of France all the way up to the French Revolution. But even the best of them had a lot of the vices of Robert. They wanted to control the church. You know, for example, one, I think it was Louis the 15th. He invited Saint Francis de Paula, who was a hermit in southern Italy, to come and visit him. And once he came to visit him, he basically kidnapped him and kept him under house arrest for the rest of his life. Even though this saint could see the future and work miracles, he wanted to keep him as a token at his court so he could use God's power for his kingdom. That's how whacked out he was. And it all begins from that, the slap of a nun. And Boniface VIII usually gets a lot of bad press, but his document Unum Sanctam, one of the great documents of the church, and the King of France was so dishonest, is when he saw the document enter his kingdom and start being distributed, he stopped it. He burnt all the copies. He wrote his own version to make the Pope look crazy, and he distributed a fake version to the churches and universities, for example, at Paris. That's how evil he was. He's definitely in the pit of hell, him and his all his counselors.
So there's a lot of, fake information about who, what, and why Martin Luther went wacko. How bad and crazy was this guy?
Okay, so Martin Luther, he was a drunk, he was a hothead, and he was a boaster. And I think he was a student at Heidelberg when it was the Catholic University. And he got in a drunken fight with one of his friends one day. And afterwards, they decided they'd settle it in the forest with a duel. Now, dueling was a felony in the German Empire at the insistence of the Pope, beginning in like the 12th centuries. The popes insisted that the kings of Europe make dueling a crime because you have no authority to kill someone. Because basically, dueling is voluntary suicide. That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And he shoots his friend dead in the forest. And fearing in the imperial ban, he would be put to death for murder, he flees and disappears. And none of his friends from Heidelberg see him again. And he goes down south to Bohemia and he becomes an Augustinian monk, same order as Cardinal Provost. And some people say will be the next pope. And he is Augustinian monk for like, I don't know, 18 years, 20 years, but he never confessed that he murdered his brother. He becomes a priest. All the sacraments he starts confecting are sacrilegious. He's receiving communion sacrilegiously every day. He just goes deeper and deeper into Satan's power until he can't take it one day. And while reading the letters of St. Paul to the Romans, he decides all he needs to do is be a believer. He doesn't need to confess his sins to a priest, and he starts the Protestant revolt. And it's all because he killed his friend and hid it. But it also has to do with the fact that he was a real simoniac. He's an Augustinian monk, and he ingratiated himself with so many powerful lords that he became abbot of like 8 or 12 monasteries at the same time. How could you be abbot of 12 monasteries at the same time? You can't be in 12 places at the same time. And he had gathered enough money together that he got into his head that he'd go to Rome and pay some cardinal and become a bishop. Well, when he came down to Rome, everyone saw that, this guy's just a climber and he's outrageously immoral. And so he didn't get named a bishop. So when he comes back to Germany, he starts the Protestant revolt, which in English history books is called the Protestant Reformation. It's not a Reformation. So all the crooks in the clergy of his day said, hey, here we go. Let's revolt from Rome and then we can marry women, and we can steal all the church money, and we can make up our own religion and commit all kinds of crimes and villainies. And so in 1517, on the Vigil of All Saints, October 31st, he nails his 95 Theses to the door of the church at Wittenberg and challenges a local Dominican friar who was preaching indulgences to a debate. And there were a lot of evil noblemen in Germany, and they'd been eyeing the lands of the church because the German Catholics were so devout that they, in their wills, had left a third of the land of Germany to the church, so that the church had tremendous economic and political power. And in the 16th century, in the 1500s in Germany, there was really no way to increase your income without getting more lands. Well, you couldn't attack the church lands, you would be excommunicated. So when they saw Luther creating this new religion that would give them a reason to steal churches' lands in the name of reforming the church, all the nobles of Germany, the noblemen of northern Germany sign on. And Luther's revolt spreads basically to the German-speaking countries. So all of the northern German-speaking, everyone speaks what's called Low German. To this day, it's in northern Germany, a little on the Rhine, the Netherlands, Belgium, all of Scandinavia. They just suck up Luther's religion. Now, Luther intentionally imitated Muhammad because he realized the way to get most men into his new religion was to say you could divorce your wife. And so all the noblemen who decide they're going to be Lutherans start dumping their wives and marrying other women. Luther ends up shacking up with a nun. Luther even starts talking to Satan, and he writes a book attacking the Catholic Mass. And when he's done writing it, Satan appears to him and says, "You have written well, Martin." He was such an evil, evil man. And that begins the Protestant revolt, which is rob Christianity from about a third of all Europeans for the next 500 years. And if you're a Protestant or you've been raised as a Christian, but you're not a Catholic or Orthodox, you don't even know where you came from. You don't even know what your ancestors believe. Every generation changed. So there's a movement will start in the Lutheran Church 150 years after Martin Luther called Pietism. And the founders of Pietism were all Lutheran pastors. They're doing it because they realized that all the founders of Lutheranism were morally and sexually depraved persons, and that none of them had any interest in Christianity. And if we're not going to if we're going to do anything to keep Lutherans from just becoming complete pagans, we start to have to bringing them back to Christ. So the whole Missouri Synod thing that we had today with the Lutherans and the Evangelical Church in Germany, all an attempt to keep Protestants from going, because after they broke from church, they broke from the church precisely because they didn't want religion. And it was widely popular in Scandinavia because the Norsemen always had a problem with chastity, and they were always having children out of wedlock and stuff. And so they felt it was a lot easier just to change religions where you could just divorce your wife. And we'll get into that in the Reformation, but eventually the Protestant Reformation will destroy the German Empire. The emperors remained Catholic until the time of Napoleon, but they had a hard time maintaining it with all these Protestants in the country. So that's a little about the glory of the Catholic faith in the Middle Ages. We didn't talk about the Reconquista. That's a whole nother story, but the Spanish were doing the right thing from the start, trying to take their lands back from the Moors. And
yeah, we do that one. That one might not be on YouTube.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about the schism of 1054 with the Greeks and how that happened. But it's just too much news at once. We're talking most about the West.
Yeah.
So our listeners are mostly Roman Catholics, so.
Yeah.
Another one.
So I think next Friday we'll do the reconquest of Spain, then get into then next Friday we'll do the split from the east and the west.
Mhm.
Then the post-Reformation where everything just goes crazy.
Yeah, it's getting crazier and crazier ever since.
So stay
This
tuned.
will,
Yeah,
no,
stay tuned
I,
for those episodes, and then yeah,
it's been great talking to you about history, AJ, of the church, and we are only touched on the very topping. This is like the cherry on the top of the cherry cake. Okay, you can just buy tons of books on the history of the church. I recommend Philip Hughes's 3 volumes History of the Church, which goes up to the Reformation of Martin and Luther, 1517. So it's about 3,000 pages of history just on the first 1,500 years of Christianity. Very good book. And he wrote an excellent book also in 2 volumes on the English Reformation, which, if you find it, buy it. And
we'll see if we can find those and put them in the show page for you folks to, if you want to get it. So this is Order Militaris Radio TV signing off. Day is full.
there's well.